3 years after committing to a review of systemic racism in Northern Territory government agencies, only one agency has been partially completed. As part of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement signed in 2021, the NT government committed to identifying and eliminating systemic racism in government agencies. Professor Chris Cunneen designed the framework for the review and he joins me now. Good morning, Chris. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Kath.
This Aboriginal Justice Agreement was signed in 2021. As I mentioned, it's been 3 years since committing to this government-wide review. What progress has been made in that time?
Look, I think it's been very patchy, and certainly in terms of the reviews of government agencies around systemic racism, it's been extraordinarily slow. We finished the report, the first report, and handed it in December 2022. It's now March 2024 and there's been no response. So that gives you an idea of how slow the wheels are turning on this.
Do you have any idea why it's been so slow?
Not really. I mean, I haven't been kept informed about it, but I think in the bigger context, there was a commitment to review 10 government agencies over the 7-year period of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, and we're halfway through that now and they've only done one. So it's not looking very good in terms of the government meeting its commitments in relation to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement in this area and also in some of the other areas as well.
Let's talk about the system now. Before you can remedy it, you have to understand it. What's your understanding of the departments and any inherent systemic racism?
Look, I think it's really important to review things like laws or policies, resource allocations. All of these can impact on leading to discriminatory outcomes for Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory. And I'd certainly add to this that it's not just an issue in relation to the Northern Territory. It's a national issue that's identified under the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. It's one of the major areas, in fact, in closing the gap. And so all states and territories throughout Australia have made commitments to review government agencies in relation to systemic racism. And look, I'd also just add too that, it's not about individuals. It's not saying that, individuals are necessarily racist. It's about the actual systems and processes that are put in place that lead to poor and detrimental outcomes for Aboriginal people. And so it's really important that these are undertaken to see how these issues can be resolved, whether we're talking about health or the police or housing, any number of issues. Telecommunications is another big issue in relation to these poor outcomes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the systems, which systems that you see are failing in this case?
Well, look, maybe if I can just give you a couple of examples. I mean, I think if you look at policing and criminal justice system, you might have bail laws in place which are difficult for Aboriginal people to meet in terms of the conditions of bail, and so they're more likely then to be remanded in custody. If you look at child protection, you might have very narrow understandings of what kinship is, which actually then discriminates against Aboriginal kinship systems. Telecommunications are a really important area, particularly for remote Aboriginal people where they can't access the internet. And we know, all of us know, that government services and non-government services like banking, for example, require on access to the internet to be able to conduct business. If you can't access the internet, then you're facing severe problems, whether you're trying to get your car registered, whether you're trying to do banking, and so on. And so they're the sorts of things that really need to be understood, not as individuals committing acts of racism, but as the kind of systemic and institutional processes that are there that lead to really poor outcomes for Aboriginal people.
So where to from here, not just in the Northern Territory, but as you mentioned, this is a national problem?
Yeah. Look, I think it's a matter of governments meeting the commitments they make. Now, the Northern Territory government signed the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. It's called an agreement. And so it's an agreement to undertake to do certain things. And it's the same with the national commitment on closing the gap. Now, if governments can't be bothered meeting their commitments, what faith could Aboriginal people have in having these issues resolved? It seems to me that it's the case where agreements are undertaken by governments, state, territory, and they're ignored or they're seen as being unimportant. And so it continues what we already know to be really poor outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Australia.